Welcome to the Mystical Dream Studio.
Hello, fellow fiends! Welcome back to the Mystical Dream Studio. I, once again, am your host, Madman McQueen. Lift your spirits! It's Halloween! Oh my goodness, my family loved Halloween. Oh, as you can possibly imagine. Oh, such wonderful, wonderful memories. When I die, I want to go like my uncle, who died peacefully in his sleep, not screaming and yelling like the other people in his car. And my sister, the one I told you about, the one that's not so bright, she one time told my father, "Dad, there's a hole in my shoe." He's, "Yes, dear, that's where your foot goes in." And my grandmother, the tough one, the one I was telling you about, she had the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban at the zoo. Family. Can't live with them, can't live without them, but they're a part of who you are for the rest of your life and sometimes even beyond. The story I'm going to tell you today is a continuation of last week's part 2 of The Hanged Woman, which dealt with 12-year-old David Ebsen. My dog Roxy. She found something to bark at in the background. But David Ebsen, he found himself in a bit of a pickle and he had a terrible decision to make. And we'll find out what happened right after this. This message from our sponsor today, Monstrin and Monstrin. Tell me, folks, do you suffer from hereditary diarrhea? Because they do say that diarrhea runs in your genes. And Monstrin and Monstrin has the latest in anti-diarrhea technology.
Cork, the most effective way of stopping diarrhea dead in its tracks. Get corked today. Use only as directed.
Monstrin and Monstrin, manufacturers of fine health scare products.
Yes, folks, Monstrin and Monstrin has developed means of stopping diarrhea at the source. After all, the two worst conditions to have at the exact same time, diarrhea and Alzheimer's. You'll be running, you just won't remember where to. But right now, I am going to enjoy the most perfect candy of Halloween. Candy corn. Oh, yes, the most perfect of Halloween candies. Last time on part 1 of The Hanged Woman, 12-year-old David Ebsen went out to do some fishing at a large pond at the back end of his family's property on the first day of summer. You see, he had been leading a double life, and it had been taking its toll on him. His mother, June, was a highly religious woman in a fanatical sort of way, and she felt that God has directed her to control the lives of her husband and children towards God's plan to save the human race. And she heard voices in her head that David was completely convinced were not real. And as he sat there, thinking about how he had to lead a double life, the one that he actually wanted to lead so he could become a veterinarian when he got older, and the one he was telling his mom about, that he was going to become a priest and do all the things that she thought he was supposed to do according to God's will. His schoolwork had been suffering, and he just had to keep his distance from his older sister, who took to tattling on him whenever she got the chance, because she wanted to seek her mother's approval rather than lead a double life like David was doing. But then as David sat there, clouds passed over the sun, and as the shadows passed over the world, over the pond, the back end of the large pond area turned into a creepy pathway which led to another world, and David found himself going into it. And this strange, surrealistic landscape that he found himself immersed in was unlike anything he had seen before. And as he wandered around some craggy hills, he saw a cluster of dead trees, and hanging from one of those trees was the decomposed remains of a dead woman. And as he looked at her and felt sorry for her, suddenly she snapped to life, and she commanded him, "Come here!" And unable to resist for fearful reasons that he could not explain, he did what she wanted him to do. He returned and stood there, and she explained that her name was Clarina, and that she was cursed by an evil wizard that she was trying to destroy after he kidnapped her sister. But she ended up getting trapped herself, and the evil wizard cursed her and was forcing her to hang there by the neck for the rest of her life, for all eternity. And she asked David if he could please cut her down. And he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do, because she said that if he cut her down, the curse would be broken and everything would be fine. But David wasn't sure. Was she supposed to be there for a reason? Suppose he cut her down and the world would be in danger. He didn't know what the right thing to do would be. So he just said, I'm sorry, and he ran away. He ran as fast as he could, trying to get home, back to the property of the pond and sunshine, and to him, what was now a normal life. But Clarina's voice boomed over the storm clouds and says, "Damn you, boy! If you leave me now, I curse you too. Darkness and suffering and pain will follow you and befall those you love for the rest of your life. If I shall not know peace, then neither shall you." "Run, boy, run," she said. And that's exactly what he did. He ran and ran. And now, folks, part 2 of The Hanged Woman. Pardon me while I put my reading glasses on. That's better. Sweaty, panic-stricken, and out of breath, David ran through the thick fog, trampled on numerous scorpions and spiders, nearly sliced himself on thorny plants, and before he knew it, he was running under the sun. He was back at the pond. He was home. David frantically looked around to make sure that nothing weird was happening around him. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, and the large overgrown area looked lush, green, and peaceful. David was unbelievably confused, and he took a moment to catch his breath. "Oh man, that was weird," he said out loud, still trying to process the experience. He began to wonder if it all had happened in reality, or was it his imagination? Could he have dreamed it? Everything seemed so vivid, and one look at the cut on his arm convinced him that it had been real. It did actually happen. His mind was still racing, and he needed to get away from that place to do some thinking. He returned to his boulder, grabbed his fishing gear, and saw another lazy cloud drift slowly toward the sun. In near panic, he ran as fast as he could toward home. After a while, he stopped running, and he walked the long, winding road past the orange trees to his house. He loved the smell of orange blossoms, and his befuddled brain began to settle down. He kept replaying the entire experience in his head, and he kept wondering if any of it had really happened. Part of his brain told him that it was real, that he had just wandered into another world of some sort. Yet another part of his brain told him that that was impossible, that things like that just don't really happen outside of storybooks and movies. His cut arm was real enough, which could mean that the whole experience was real. But then there was the curse. The woman cursed him in the end. He wondered what that meant as he absent-mindedly scratched at his cut arm, which was beginning to itch. As he neared his house, the rational side of his brain decided that it did not happen. He was simply going insane, just like his mother. She talked to God. He talked to dead people. It all made so much sense now. Somewhere in his DNA was the crazy gene, and it chose today to kick in. "Thanks, Mom," he muttered to himself as he reached the house. Whiskey, their tabby cat, greeted him by brushing against his leg. The pickup truck was gone, which meant that his dad was at work, but Brenda and his mom were both home. David did not want to run into either of them, so he quietly went to the garage and put his fishing gear away. David stood there all alone in the garage, trying to work up the nerve to go inside the house. The old familiar feelings of dread returned to the pit of his stomach. He had to be on his guard. He had to be ready with a quick response or a convincing lie if his mother asked him anything. He had to be absolutely ready for whatever was thrown his way. So he took a deep breath, put on his best normal face, and left the garage for the house. The sidewalk went around the side of the house toward the kitchen door. The kitchen windows were open, and he could hear Brenda singing off-key to the top 40 hits on the radio. She was 16 and thought she was a fantastic singer and dancer. She was wrong. She was finishing up some chores, and he hoped to slip by her without notice. Unfortunately, the old spring on the screen door made that loud, familiar, rusty squeal. Brenda was using a sponge to wipe down the kitchen counter and looked at David as he walked in. "Hey, David, wipe your feet. I just mopped the floor." "Okay. Mom's looking for you. She's got some stuff she wants you to do today." She caught a glimpse of David's injured arm and was instantly concerned. "What did you do to your arm?" The girl rushed over and took a closer look at the cut. Her short blonde hair smelled like that green apple shampoo she's liked so much. David's mind thought quickly. "I was running and slipped. An old tree branch got me." "You gotta be more careful." Brenda examined the wound. "It's not bad. Come into the bathroom. I'll get you cleaned up." David followed her to the hall bathroom, which was decorated entirely in pink. It was a little too girly for his taste. Dad coped with it by saying that it wasn't pink, it was dusty rose. David didn't care what his dad called it, it was still pink. Brenda sat him on the toilet and used a washcloth to clean the dried blood from his arm. She then took a bottle of hydrogen peroxide from the medicine cabinet and carefully applied it to the wound. It stung a bit, and David watched it as it bubbled on his skin. "I found the note you were supposed to give Mom and Dad," she said, still tending to his wound. David was momentarily caught off guard. "What?" "That note from your principal, the one you hid in that book on your shelf." "What were you doing in my room?" "Just tell me what's going on, and I want the truth." He tried to act as casual as possible. "It's just a note. It's not important." "Really?" She looked at him briefly in the eye and then put a couple of adhesive bandages on the cut. "You've been held back a year, and Mrs. Hannigan is concerned that might not even do you any good." "Sounds important to me." David felt trapped again. "I just need some time to figure out what I'm going to tell Mom and Dad. You know how Mom can be." "I don't get it," Brenda said. "That report card you gave Mom and Dad wasn't that bad. If you flunked out, why didn't the report card say something about it?" David fidgeted nervously. He didn't like confiding in Brenda, and he didn't trust her. "I forged it," he said. "You did what?" "I know where they keep the blank report cards, and I grabbed a few. I stole one of the teacher's pens and copied her writing. The card I gave Mom and Dad was a fake." Brenda stood up and looked at his arm. It looked much better. "There, you're all set." David studied Brenda. He tried to get a sense of what she was thinking. He couldn't read her. "Please don't tell Mom and Dad. I'll tell them when the time's right." "When's that?" "I don't know." David hung his head in shame. "I'll know it when the time comes." "I don't think you'll have to wait very long," she said as she washed her hands. "I gave the note to Mom." The blood drained from David's face. "You did what?" Brenda dried her hands on a towel. You heard me. How could you do that? Somebody has to keep you honest. I know you. You're always up to something, except for the things you should be focusing on. Like what? He asked, his spirit at the breaking point. School, for one thing. David became angry and stood up. You had no business going through my stuff. I'm your big sister. That gives me the right. Knock it off, Bren, he confronted her, his face turning red. You're a suck-up, admit it. All you want to do is kiss Mom's butt. You're a suck-up, and you're using me to do it. Go get a life of your own and keep your nose out of mine. Heathen, a woman's voice said from the hall. June Ebsen, David's mother, came and stood in the bathroom doorway. Her long dark hair fell over her shoulders, and a rosary was worn as a necklace. She refused to wear makeup. It was against God's will, which made her face appear all the more severe. But the look on her face at that moment was beyond severe, and he knew that look very well. Well, David, the devil certainly has a hold on you, doesn't he? The sternness of her voice told David exactly what was coming next. In these situations, David learned that staying silent was best. Anything he said would be twisted around by his mom, so he just kept his mouth shut. Say something, you godless little heathen, she demanded. Brenda squeezed past her mom as she left the bathroom. I'm going to finish my chores. June kissed the girl on the forehead. Thank goodness I have one good child. God will reward you. Brenda flashed David a wicked little smile as she went back toward the kitchen, leaving him and his mom alone in the bathroom. Consorting with the devil, David? No, Mom. June smacked him across the face. Don't lie to me! David held his stinging cheek. I'm not lying, Mom. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. David smacked him again. In order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. David became teary-eyed and tried to back away, but the small bathroom offered little shelter. Don't, Mom, please! June began to smack David repeatedly, one hit after another, while quoting the Bible. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part of both the Lord's table and the table of demons. David cried and raised his arms defensively. The cut on his arm began to bleed again. Renounce him, David, June said in frenzied voice. Renounce the evil one and send him back to hell. June started to pound on David with her fists. David! David was on his knees and shielded his head with his arms. In the name of Jesus, renounce him! Through his screams and cries, David found his voice. Okay, I renounce him. June stopped her assault and took a step back. Louder! David raised his hands in supplication. Devil, be gone! He then shouted, In the name of Jesus, leave me alone and go back to hell! June watched him as he sat on his feet and cried. His arms were still outstretched toward heaven, and the blood from his cut arm dripped off his elbow to the floor. David braced himself against another assault, but nothing happened. He looked up at his scowling mother, who just stood there. I'm disappointed in you, David, she said. How could you let the devil into your life like that? He looked pleadingly at her with his tear-streaked face. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. He looked pleadingly at her and just kept saying, I'm sorry. And June looked down at her son with an unreadable expression. She then became loving and approached him with outstretched arms. Oh, David, oh, my poor boy. David instinctively recoiled from her as she helped him to his feet and she hugged him tightly. "Oh, David," June began to rock from side to side with him in her arms. "You can't let your guard down for an instant. Satan knows of God's plan, that our family will be instrumental in his final downfall. So he's going to work extra hard to destroy us." Still frightened, David tried to hug his mother back. June kissed his head. "You worry me, son. When the 3 days of darkness comes, only the righteous will survive." She held him at arm's length and looked at him sternly. "God has chosen this family as his holy warriors. When you become a priest, you will preach the will of God, and you will lead the sick and the lame to me for God's healing." David just nodded. He had heard it all before, many, many times. "When the 3 days of darkness comes," she continued, "we must light the blessed candle of pure wax, pray the rosary, and beg God for mercy. The whole world will be cast into darkness. Pestilence and destruction will claim God's enemies, and demons will be unleashed to torment all who do evil. After the darkness clears in 3 days, we will rally the survivors back to God." David knew the sermon by heart. All he could do was nod. June looked him in the eye and wiped away his tears. "The end of the world will follow after 1,000 years of peace." "I know." David tried to sound as if he believed it. "Praise God." "The devil will be defeated, son, and he knows he's running out of time, so he's going to work extra hard to destroy us. But God will protect us if we ask him, for we are his chosen ones." "I'll be more on my guard, Mom. I promise." June hugged him again. "Oh, David, nothing can harm us with God as our protector. Remember that." "It won't happen again." June released him. "I was going to have you do some things for me today, but I think you should spend the day in your room begging God for forgiveness. Brenda will bring you your lunch." "Okay, Mom." "As far as that note from Mrs. Hannigan is concerned, just wait until your father gets home. I'm sure he'll have a thing or two to say about that." He didn't know how to react. And David... "Yes, Mom?" June pointed to the blood on the floor. "Clean up this mess before you leave." He was heartbroken. "I will." A dejected David waited for his mother to leave the bathroom. "I'm fine, Mom," he muttered quietly to himself. He looked at his arm. It was bleeding slightly, and the adhesive bandages needed to be replaced. "Thanks for your concern." After spending the day in his room reading comic books and several volumes from his World Wildlife series, David was bored. At 5 o'clock, Brenda came and got him. It was his turn to set the table for supper. As he placed the plates and silverware on the kitchen table, he did his best to appear appropriately pious. Dad would be home soon, which meant that he would learn about Mrs. Hannigan's note. David was not looking forward to the inevitable talk that would follow. He and Brenda chose not to speak to one another, which suited him just fine. He didn't like her very well at that moment. He went to the sink and grabbed 4 clean drinking glasses and failed to notice the scorpions that scurried by the canisters on the counter. Mom walked in and went to the oven to check on her tuna casserole. That's when Pete, their father, came through the kitchen door, a little haggard from working all day. Pete was tall, stocky, and in a pretty good mood. "Hey everyone, the breadwinner is home." With a big smile, Brenda ran over and hugged him. "Hi, Daddy." Carrying his lunchbox and thermos, Pete put his free arm around her and gave her a gentle squeeze. "Hi, sweetheart. How's your day?" "Just fine." She went back to the sink and washed some strawberries for dessert. "Jenny and I are going to the movies tonight." Pete put his lunchbox and thermos on the counter near the refrigerator, not seeing the scorpion by his feet. "Oh yeah? What's playing?" "We're going to see that new animated movie, The Clown Bears." June put the casserole back in the oven. Oh, I hear that's a sweet movie. Another milestone in cinematic history. Pete walked over and gave June a kiss. Hello, dear. David silently listened. He knew that Bren was full of it. Jenny and Bren would never go see the Clown Bears. They were probably going to go see that new scary movie, The Coagulator. She would not dare admit it to Mom, or Mom would bring down the wrath of God upon her too. Bren would never tarnish her precious good girl image with the truth. The sad part was, both she and David were fighting the same fight. She just decided to go about it in an evil and selfish way. Pete walked over and patted David on the head. What about you, David? Did you enjoy your first day of summer? June answered for him. David got himself into a bit of trouble today. She looked at her son. Didn't he? Pete looked at the boy. Oh? Yes, June continued. It seems the little twit hasn't been completely honest with us. Pete gave the boy an exasperated look. What did you do now? Once again, David adopted an attitude of silence. Pete grew impatient. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Pete waited for an answer David was not prepared to give. Well? David just stared quietly at the floor. June tapped Pete on the shoulder and gestured with her head toward the living room. Come on, let's talk in here. Pete shook her head and followed his wife into the other room and out of sight. Brenda had a big smile on her face. David's in trouble, she said in a taunting, sing-songy way. He did not have a witty comeback, so he just stuck his tongue out at her. The girl chuckled. You're so weird. David waited for what seemed an eternity for his parents to finish talking. David was going to speak to him afterward. That was unavoidable. And this was not the first time his fake life and real life crashed into one another. He just had to wait it out and be more careful the next time. David scratched at his injured arm. It had been itching all day, but now it was beginning to burn inside. Brenda continued to work on the strawberries she was preparing for dessert. Sweets of any sort were forbidden in the house, but berries and fruit were gifts from God, so Mom allowed them. That was when the kitchen lights began to flicker and dim. The girl was slicing the berries with a large butcher's knife, and she looked up in mid-slice. The lights continued to flicker, and it gave David an eerie feeling. Oh, great, she said as she resumed her slicing. We might be eating dinner by candlelight. David got a chill, and he could not shake the nasty feeling that something bad was about to happen. Brenda suddenly dropped the knife on the counter and screamed. She quickly turned toward David, and he saw 2 scorpions on her arm, stinging her. Another scorpion was crawling up her leg. Their alarmed parents burst into the room. Pete looked around, trying to figure out what was happening. What's the matter? Brenda was screaming and crying as she thrashed about the room. Get him off me! Get him off! Pete swatted the 2 scorpions from her arm, but before he could get the one that crawled up her leg, it stung her in the exposed area of flesh between her pants and her shirt. Pete knocked the creature off and stomped on it, squashing it dead. Brenda was screaming in pain as Mom and Dad looked her over. June made the sign of the cross and helped her to a chair. Pete looked around the room. Damn scorpions, where the hell did they come from? June shot her husband an angry look. Watch your language, Pete. June sat Brenda down and looked over her wounds. It's all right, sweetheart. Hush now. June stroked her daughter's hair in an effort to calm the crying girl. Trust in the Lord, and He will heal you. It hurts, Brenda kept saying as June still tried to soothe and calm her. It's just God's way of testing you. Pete's facial expression changed to one of unbelievable astonishment. Excuse me? June kept trying to soothe her suffering daughter. Don't let the devil win, sweetheart. The Lord is testing you to see how strong your faith is. If you truly believe in him, Brenda, believe that he will heal you, and he will. David felt so helpless as he was very scared. Then he saw something on his dad's face that he had never seen before. Anger toward Mom. Pete moved June away, and he looked at his daughter. Stop it, June. We have to take her to the emergency room. June was flabbergasted. That's blasphemy, Pete. No, it's reality, he told her. If you take her to see a doctor, you will have shown that you have no faith. You'd be slapping the face of God. Pete looked at his wife. God gave us doctors for a reason, and I'm going to take her to see one with or without you. You're going to have to do it without me. I don't want to be part of Satan's sick schemes to undermine God's will. Suit yourself. Pete carefully lifted his crying daughter and carried her out of the kitchen door. David wanted to help, so he followed them outside. The evening sky was filling with dark and ominous-looking storm clouds, and the wind was beginning to blow. When they reached the pickup truck, all 4 tires were flat. Pete was angry and confused. What the? David stood beside him and saw the disabled vehicle. What happened, Dad? The tires are all flat. How'd that happen? Beats me. Pete gently lowered Brenda to the ground. We don't have time for this, David. Yeah? Keep an eye on Brenda. I'm going to go across the street and see if Wyatt can give us a ride. I will. David watched his dad run down the driveway toward the street. His attention wandered back to the cut on his arm, which was really starting to hurt. Brenda's muscles abruptly began to twitch, and she seemed to have difficulty breathing. David was quite frightened and spoke to her. Come on, Bren. Hang in there. Dad's getting help. He looked up and watched his dad cross the street, just as a speeding car plowed into him. David watched in disbelief and horror as Pete tumbled through the air and hit the pavement several yards away. The car that hit him lost control, flipped over, and skidded to a halt on its roof. Dad! David ran into the street to help his injured father. The wrecked car was in flames, and David could hear the driver calling out for help. Then the vehicle exploded, and David shielded his dad from the blast. Dad! Dad! Pete was alive, but unresponsive. He made a strange sound when he breathed, and his eyes moved all over the place. It was doubtful he even heard his son. David yelled at the top of his lungs, Mom! Mom, help me! Before long, June stepped outside and saw fearful omens in the sky. Clouds were rolling through the area in unnatural patterns, and the lightning was most unearthly. Dear God Almighty, June said, mesmerized by the world that was beginning to transform all around them. It's here, David. The 3 days of darkness is here. Mom, Dad's been hit by a car. What? June tore her attention away from the darkening neighborhood and saw her son kneeling beside her bleeding husband, an overturned car in flames several yards away. She ran to her injured husband and was obviously frightened. Pete? Oh, God, Pete! Swirling fire started to radiate through the clouds overhead, an enormous maelstrom vortex that looked as if it was preparing to consume the entire world. We have to go now! June was frantic. David, help me get them inside! David was confused. He's hurt bad. He might die if we move him. June reached behind her husband, slipped her arms under his, and tried to lift him. He'll die out here for sure if we don't. Grab his feet. David took hold of his dad's ankles and tried to lift him, but his arm hurt too much. A feeling like a hot flame shot through his arm, and he involuntarily let go of his dad's legs. "Come on, David, we have to hurry!" David had no choice. He had to brave the pain and help carry his dad to safety. Once again, he grabbed Pete's ankles, endured the excruciating pain, and helped his struggling mom carry him toward the house. Pete moaned and cried out in pain, yet none of the bystanding neighbors lifted a finger to help. They were too preoccupied with the churning, fire-riddled sky. Brenda was in bad shape and vomiting in the driveway. She was still sitting there, with her back against the pickup. She was sweaty, extremely pale, and her breathing was labored. David spoke through his pain. "Hold on, Bren. I'll come back for you." June and David finally managed to get Pete inside. The man was coughing up blood and looked too close to death. The two of them laid him down on the couch and tried to make him as comfortable as possible. June almost instantly ignored her husband, frantically grabbed the Afghan from the sofa and used it to cover the front window. The house lights continued to flicker. Her actions confused David. "Mom, call 911. "No need. The Lord will save us." He could not believe his ears. "David and Brenda need help, Mom. They need the help now. I'm going back out to the driveway and bring her inside." Frightened and confused, he rushed to the front door. "Just call 911, he called out. David hurried to the driveway and knelt beside his suffering sister. "Hey, Bren, come on." He grabbed hold of her and helped her to her feet. "Let's get you inside." His arm was burning with pain, and she had a lot of difficulty walking, but they were finally able to get back inside the house. As he helped her to a recliner, he looked around. Mom was nowhere in sight. "Mom?" June returned with blankets from the bedroom. She had a hammer and nails in her hand. He watched as she began to nail the blankets over the windows. "Did you call 911? June glared at the boy. "Your lack of faith concerns me, David. Your dad didn't have faith, and look where he's at right now. Look where his lack of faith has gotten him." She continued to cover the windows. "This is a wonderful gift we're receiving. We are about to be tested by fire, and the Lord will not abandon us if we truly have faith and trust in Him." David shook his head in anger and frustration, walked across the room, grabbed his mom's cell phone, and dialed 911. A woman's voice answered. 911, what's your emergency?" "My dad and sister are both hurt really bad and need help." "Okay, just stay calm and tell me what happened." "My dad was hit by a car. He's coughing up blood. My sister got stung by scorpions in our kitchen. I think she's having trouble breathing or something." "And you need help?" the voice asked. "Yes, I need help. I live at 3237 Gorham Road. Please send help. Hurry." There was a brief pause on the phone, then, "I needed help too, David." That old, familiar feeling of dread returned to his stomach. He knew that voice. The voice of the hanged woman. "I begged you for help and you abandoned me." He dropped the phone and it burst into flame right there on the floor. Clarina's laughter echoed through the burning device. That was the moment the power went out and the house stayed in complete and total darkness. Join me next time, folks, for part 3, the exciting conclusion of The Hanged Woman. You won't believe how it turns out. Please like this video, comment down below. I would love to hear what's on your mind. And hit that little notification bell, because once this story's over, there will be many, 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 many more coming your way. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, crime dramas, even holiday-themed stories. Christmas is coming. It's right around the corner, you know. Madman's tip for the day. Be happy with who you are. Don't change for anyone. The world needs more happy, weird people. Till next time, folks. Remember, do as you imagine, and the stars shall light the way for your dreams. Until next time, Farewell, and happy Halloween!